String operators. In this video, we will learn which and how operators can be used on string values. This table shows the two operators that can be used on string values, the plus operator and the multiplication operator. However, when these operators are used on strings, they do not have the same meaning that they have when used on integers or floats. When the plus operator is used on two strings, the plus operator combines those two strings together, as you see in the two examples in the first two rows. In the first example, I used the plus operator on the string ABC and 1, 2, 3 to produce a single string containing ABC 1, 2, 3. Then in the second row, I used the plus operator twice on three different strings. I used the plus operator to combine x, y, and 3 into one string containing x, y, 3 side by side. The act of combining strings together is called concatenation. Likewise, the multiplication operator, when used on a string, does not have the same meaning as it does when it's used on two integers or two floats. When I multiply a string times an integer, what I'm telling Python to do is to repeat that string a number of times equal to the value of that integer. So for example, when I say multiply the string AB times 3, what I'm asking Python to do is to repeat AB 3 times and make that one string. And as you can see in the table, the order does not matter. Whether I do a string times an integer or an integer times a string, the meaning is the same. What I cannot do in Python is attempt to multiply two strings. This has no meaning in Python, so if I attempt to do it, then the Python interpreter will print out an error message. Likewise, I cannot add a string with an integer. This also has no meaning in Python, thus if I attempt to do it, the Python interpreter will print out an error message. And this is actually a common mistake with beginner programmers, so I'll use a couple of examples to illustrate how this mistake commonly gets made and how we can avoid it. Consider this line of code. Here, my intention is to combine the string ABC with 1, 2, 3 to produce an output of ABC 1, 2, 3. However, when I execute this, the Python interpreter prints out an error message because, again, I'm attempting to concatenate a string with an integer, which is not allowed. If I want to concatenate the two strings, there are two ways I can do this, either by placing quotation marks around 1, 2, 3, or using the str method on 1, 2, 3 to convert 1, 2, 3 to a string. Once I do that, Python interpreter will allow it and will thus give me the output that I was looking for. Now consider this program. In this program, my intention is to ask the user how many pounds are you, then convert that number to ounces by multiplying it times 16, then print that result out in line 3. However, there are two errors in this code. The first error being in line 2. In line 2, I'm attempting to multiply pounds times 16 while forgetting that pounds is a string variable. Because remember, whenever you use the input method, whatever you type in will be stored as a string. Thus, when the Python interpreter reaches line 2, it's going to see that I'm attempting to multiply a string times an integer. And then rather than do math multiplication, which was my intention, it's simply going to repeat whatever the user typed in 16 times, which was not my intention. Notice, this kind of error is not the type of error that'll produce an error message. The Python interpreter isn't going to print an error message telling you, hey, you're using the wrong variable type. It's going to do what you ask, and it's going to repeat whatever you typed 16 times. This is an example of a logic error. A logic error occurs when we write code that does not raise an error message, but leads to the wrong outcome. Another example of a logic error would be if I was writing a program that was supposed to compute the area of a rectangle, but rather than multiply the length times width, I added the length and width together. Once again, that type of error isn't going to produce an error message, it's just going to give you the wrong answer. So in line 2, we have a logic error because we should be multiplying two integers, not a string and an integer. So to do that, I need to convert pounds to an integer using the int method. Once pounds gets converted to an integer, the interpreter will see that we're multiplying two integers and thus we'll do math multiplication, which was our intent. That being said, this process will subsequently lead to an error in line 3 because now we're attempting to concatenate a string with an integer because the OZ variable is now an integer. Originally, OZ was a string, but because we changed the expression in line 2 to a math expression, the Python interpreter stored the value as an integer. Hence, in line 3, if I want to print that value out as a string, if I want to combine that value with the string, I need to convert the OZ variable back to a string, which I can do using the str method. By using the str method, the OZ variable will be converted back to a string, and thus the Python interpreter will now allow me to perform concatenation with it. Henceforth, when I execute this program, here's what occurs. In line 1, how many pounds are you gets printed out. It gets asked to the user. So let's say I'm the user and I type 5, for example. Then in line 2, the 5, which is currently a string, will get converted to an integer using the int method, then multiply times 16 to give us the value 80. That 80 will then get printed as part of a sentence in line 3, giving this as our output. You weigh 80 ounces.